solution for the large number of people that wrote in questions and expressed concern about the fact they're living next to these bat roosts. There's a question here from Sandra. She's wondering whether lights can actually scare away flying foxes if you've got them living next to you. There's another question here from Sharon at Home Hill. Is there anything you can spray on the trees to stop the bats actually roosting in them?
I suppose the techniques of dispersal is varied. I mean, perhaps the methods that we use are both either by an individual or an entity, the usual local governments. What we're looking to do is to have a more strategic approach by geographic area. So, for example, and we're working with the Gold Coast Council at the moment and also in Mount Isa to look at a sort of like a local government area overlay of their planning scheme, for example, with their vegetation, looking at where flying foxes currently exist, where they've historic sites, historic roosts, because some of these roost sites have been around for quite a few years, even hundreds of years in some cases. And then there's new roost sites and the mobility of these animals to move from location to location. But the plan we're trying to develop here is to have like a 3-year time horizon, which then says for a given geographic area, within a local government area, for example, we would establish where it's okay to have flying foxes, where it's best not to have them, and ultimately move towards a proactive approach to manage flying foxes before they become a big issue. So in other words, everyone accepts that in that planning scheme, for example, council would have, if you like, an arrangement whereby they can initiate actions to move on flying foxes early rather than wait till the population expands and it becomes somewhat more problematic, because we really do empathise, and I personally have lived very close to flying foxes in North Queensland when I was in Cairns. And yes, they're noisy, they're smelly, they poo everywhere. But I defer to Queensland Health, to Michael in terms of the health question. I defer to Biosecurity Queensland in terms of the transmission of Hendra, for example. In Derm's case, our job is to sort of trying to balance the issue associated with living in close proximity to flying foxes. And I think developing one of those 3-year plans, developing buffers around existing roost sites, having a proactive approach to activities, which includes noise, smoke, lights, pyrotechnics, in the right sort of place and time and so on, are all tools that we've used to a lesser or greater extent, and to a greater extent, reasonably successfully. So we're about sharing that information and trying to embed that into a local plan, if I could describe it that way.
Just if I could briefly comment, so Clive, in answer to those questions, there is specifically a DERM process whereby people who are feeling that they have a problem can approach DERM, approach their local council, and be part of this, of working towards a solution that's hopefully a win-win situation.
Yes, that's great.
If you can't get rid of the flying foxes, and I won't go to one specific question here, because there were a lot of questions about then, if you can't get rid of the flying foxes, you've got them on your property, what precautions do you have to take if you have horses?
You need to separate the horses out from the flying foxes. The evidence shows that there is a transmission from flying fox to horses, and horses that graze under trees, that graze trees themselves, and ingest some of the spats, which are the bits of fruit that flying foxes spit out, and potentially the droppings of flying foxes. That is the potential for the horse to get infected. And so we advise that where possible, where there's flying fox activity within a tree or within an area, to take your horses away from that. You may want to fence around that area to prevent that. If that's difficult, you may want to do that at times when there are flying foxes active. You may want to clean up under trees, but the real key to this is removing the horses and the flying fox connection. And that includes feed as well, to make sure that your feed is not under the tree, that your water is not under the tree. Where possible, you would provide your feed and water covered, so there won't be any droppings going into that feed and water. And the other part of that is for you is to actually keep an eye on your horse. If your horse becomes sick, call a vet. One of the things about Hendra virus is there are no classical signs. It could be anything to seem to be colic, or it could be a nervous sign, it could be a respiratory sign. Even experts can't pick the difference. And so you really need your vet to come in there and test the animal, look at the animal, and for you to minimise your contact with that animal and take good hygiene precautions while that happens. So don't allow your son or your daughter to kiss the horse when it's sick. Minimise your contact, get it vet, get it tested, and take good hygiene precautions, and then you're minimising the risk to you.
Could I add to that, Sharon? Look, in the context, and I think it's important to remember that in the context of trees that attract flying foxes, it's not just fruiting trees, it's flowering trees as well. So flying foxes do feed on native fig trees, but they also feed on native eucalypt trees as well. So flowering eucalypts as well as fruit trees are potentially trees that need to be watched. And typically the flowering and the fruiting is seasonal. It may well be that the potential for transmission is greater in something like a big Moreton Bay fig that's in full fruit, simply because the amount of flying foxes and the amount of feeding activity and the potential amount of food debris that can fall from that tree as well, as opposed to a eucalypt where there are flowers. One of the things that we have found with our data logger study recently, and it's still ongoing, is that some particular weed species are just magnets for flying foxes, and in particular crocus palms. We've looked at a lot of the data logging stuff that we've got. We're able to zoom down and see where these animals are feeding and then go out and ground truth it. And on many, many occasions we're seeing crocus palms are the focus of attention for flying fox feeding. I don't know if they particularly like them or if they're eating them because they're hungry and there's nothing else to eat, but these are a weed species and they're clearly very attractive to flying foxes.
So should you be chopping them down if you have...
Well, look, that would be my recommendation. I understand they're declared weed species by many local authorities, and I'm not even sure if it's a DERM thing as well. But the other interesting thing we saw, and I apologise for digressing, another weed species was asparagus fern or asparagus vine, rambling over remnant vegetation, very dense, and animals were feeding on the berries in that vine. Now, this might be something that they don't normally feed on, but they clearly have been, we've clearly seen evidence that they're feeding on it in this study. So I think there are some specific trees that are